찬성 측 퍼스트 토너먼트 팀의 두 번째 토론자 홍현진 학생의 발표를 들어보셨는데요. 어떻게 들으셨나요?
예, 지금 이 두 번째 연사는 첫 번째 연사를 좀 지원을 해야 돼요. 그래서
네.
위기보다 인위적 개입이 필요하다는 거를 다시 한번 강조를 하고
네.
지금 반대팀에서 아니 자연스럽게 시장 원칙으로 조정이 될 것이다라는 거에 대해서는 이런 에너지 회사들이 국가기관 산업이 많기 때문에 무조건 자유시장에 맡길 수는 없다라고
네.
지금 이제 반박을 한 거죠.
예, 그렇군요. 자, 그럼 반대팀 무현면 팀의 윤소연 학생의 발언 들어보겠습니다.
Start. Mr. Speaker, I'm going to go on straight to my rebuttals. So first, starting with a rebuttal about the tactics and the nature of companies, the energy companies that we're talking about right now. So they give you an example of public utility companies, but in fact, that's actually a good example for us because that one company that they're talking about, which isn't really an energy company but a public utility company, is government subsidized and at the same time very, very inefficient, and actually inefficient because it's government subsidized. But what we're talking about is not these public utility companies, but the companies that drill and supply energy, such as SK and GS. They basically agreed to that. So, and there are many. But then they basically agreed that the free market is working in terms of these companies and that these companies are learning to reallocate their resources somehow, although their first speaker didn't say so. So now, then they say that the companies do both. The companies are learning how to reallocate their resources, but it doesn't matter because even if these companies are doing both sustainable energy and non-renewable energy, then it doesn't matter because the government ultimately takes money from one sector and gives it to the other, but it's still the same company, so it doesn't matter. Basically, that's what they told you. But then why are you making this policy in the first place? Moreover, we say that's a problem because the government is deciding. And basically, the government is stepping in and saying, since you're going to do this policy anyways, here, we'll do this for you. And basically, that doesn't work because that messes with market principles, which we've been talking about, in which when the government invests and says this is the industry that we want to promote, sometimes it's not the industry that's best for the market. No, thank you, sir. That's what causes inefficiencies such as Solyndra. No, thank you, sir. And then basically that market fails. So then they say, no, thank you, sir. They also mischaracterize these tactics of companies by saying that companies are going to say, well, since we know that we're going to eventually die out, let's make a hell of money while we can. And they're choosing these unsustainable tactics, so we have to stop them from doing it and make them invest in renewable energy, which is actually different from what the first speaker said. But then they say, no, thank you, sir. So then they say, when these companies make a hell of money, then suddenly everything will fail. But then we think that even if high school debaters here know that this isn't going to happen, if we are aware of the consequences and we are aware of the threats, then those companies will know too. And in fact, there is sufficient proof in the status quo that they already know because they're the ones that are investing in SK and GS, or they're the ones that are investing in green energy. They're the ones that are trying to promote things such as solar energy, even though they're the very companies that have, for the past few decades, promoted unsustainable energy because they too know that it's not working. And so basically we can see from the point that the fact that they're investing that these companies will do it by themselves. So then secondly, going on to the second rebuttal about who is the best actor to promote clean energy, because basically we came to the consensus that we need to promote clean energy. They say that the government is responsible. But if we look at most precedents, the government is not actually responsible for most scientific breakthroughs. What this means is that in fact, in terms of renewable energy, all these attempts by the government to fund a certain section of the sustainable energy has actually failed. We've given you the example of Solyndra, but not only that, there's also been cases in Italy and other parts of Europe in which the sustainable energy industry had been subsidized for decades, and then the government decided that it was inefficient. Basically, and they gave us the example of the train too, and that's great too, because the train, although it was 100 years ago, was a private breakthrough created by demand. We think that there is sufficient demand in the status quo. So basically, we asked them, what's their... No, thank you, sir. So moving on to my third rebuttal, which is about, is this going to change anything? Because basically they're pretending if we bear through this kind of minor shock right now, we'll get through and we won't have to face the big shock later on. That's actually factually untrue for the very reasons I've been talking to you about for the past 3 minutes. But basically we say that this isn't going to change anything first because if they're so concerned about reducing oil, then oil taxes already exist. And here the issue is that we're taking more from fossil fuel energy and we're giving it to where the government sees fit. Basically, we see that the government is not the best actor to choose where the government should invest in. And then secondly, we say that if we use energy like we do now and we try to increase the prices so that less people will use it, which is basically their tactic, it's not going to work unless you increase the price by $50 per gallon. We see that's not going to happen. Even if it does, it actually creates a worse harm on society. So then what are we going to do? No, thank you, sir. We have to shift to renewables, not by the government, but by private market investment. And then if we have a breakthrough in renewable technology, which we prove to you isn't going to happen through the arbitrary choices of the government, then the consumers will move where there is the cheapest and most efficient energy. So, and their alternative to that is that we can create a minor oil shock, say, I don't know, we can do this gradually is basically what they're saying. And so basically they conceded that we will suffer, whether it's minor or major, an oil shock. And it is major because even a 30%, no thank you sir, even a 30% increase in oil prices in the 1970s and 80s actually created this really big oil bust that affected the economy, the world economy for over a decade. And that was when we were even less globalized. So we say that in the status quo, no thank you sir, we can do that if we have a breakthrough technology. And where will that breakthrough technology come from? It will come from the investment as it is already in the status quo. It will come from the investment of these private entities. We say that the free market allows for more gradual and strategic shift of capital. This is the important part. No thank you, sir. Through the free market, we will strategically be able to shift that capital until we get that technology or until we get that the level of market implementation that we would like. No thank you, sir. So with that, I'd like to move on to my constructive argument about how this policy is actually counterproductive. We say that what the government is trying to do is actually damaging what is already existing and the private corporations that are already investing in the status quo. We say that the government has a crowding. This is based on the principle of a crowding out effect, in which the government is deterring private investment that is actually and already occurring. So the first reason for this is that in order for technology to develop, there has to be a certain level of competition, whereas these companies that have been funded for so long have reached this level of complacency in which the government keeps investing, but they're not making any progress because they're actually not the right places to be investing in. So we gave you not just the example of Solyndra, but also like actual countries such as Italy and Spain, and even South Korea that is stopping renewable energy subsidies from this year on. And these countries have all failed to do this through subsidies. Secondly, we say that we are also taking money away from the very companies that are dying out anyways, and because they know that they're dying out, they're already reallocating their resources even without government investment. So basically they're saying, since it's within one company, since it's basically like the same companies such as SK and GS are doing it anyways, it doesn't matter if the government steps in and reallocates the resources from here to there, right? No, because we said that there's a very crucial factor in it, that the government is deciding among the various companies. For example, if there are a lot of energy companies, and we prove to you that there are, then the government doesn't necessarily know which is the right one to be investing in. So basically we see that, and it's actually better for those companies to be competing for the advantage, to be competing for the first breakthrough. And so it's not good to provide this kind of level of complacency to them. But then we say that private investment, on the other hand, has led to implementation. And the government investment that has occurred to this point will be replaced because in the status quo, we already recognize that there is an energy crisis. Even consumers such as us know that there is an energy crisis, right? So private investors are moving towards investing in sustainable energy. But they're being deterred by the government, and their choices are being altered by the government also. We think that the fundamental difference is that these companies that are doing private investment can venture. They can take adventures. However, if you're doing this with taxpayer money, governments can only be very conservative. They can't afford to make these ventures and do it on taxpayer money. So basically, we say that that's where the difference comes from. And then lastly, we say that even the government is also losing the moral high ground because it's punishing these energy companies that are already dying anyways, even when it's not the fault of the energy corporations that are drilling oil that they're not developing sustainable energy. And even if you leave it, they will still reallocate their resources to the effective amount for the economy. So for these reasons, we are very proud to oppose.
네, 반대 측 두 번째 토론자 모현면 팀의 윤소연 학생의 발표 들어보셨습니다. 교수님 정리를 좀 해주실까요?
예, 지금 윤소연 양이 굉장히 전략적으로 잘 답변했는데요. 아까 앞선 발표에서 공기업 뿐만이 아니라 민간 기업은 잘하고 있다라고 얘기를 했거든요.
네.
잘하고 있는데 뭐하러 또 세금을 매기려고 하느냐.
네.
그렇게 해서 그 좀 앞팀 이야기를 활용을 했고요.
예.
기술 혁신 민간 부문에서 투자로 잘 이루어질 수 있다라고 했는데 지금 이번에 이 POI 그러니까 질문을 하나도 안 받은 게
네.
소연 양은
마이크
약간
테스트.
좀 아쉽네요.
예,
네, 받았으면 좋았을 텐데.
Mic test.
자, 그럼 찬성 측 세 번째 토론자의 발표 들어보겠습니다.
Opposition here tells me that we have 30 years down the road until we lose our oil industry and deplete it completely. Then, a second later, they told me that it's still in the research and development stage, renewable energy. And they say that it's just a gradual process that will happen in time. If you ask me and the proposition, we're in big trouble. Why has this motion been brought to light? The fundamental reason this motion has been brought to light is not because the oil industry is being depleted. It's an additional problem. It's being depleted and we don't know how to solve it. The proposition's policy here is a double policy. It's trying to take care of the expenses that we fear that these oil-based companies will pay. And we're trying to make the transition as smooth as possible so that the citizens in the future will not be suffering any big oil shocks as they said in the 1980s and 90s. But first of all, before I like to go on into the questions, I would like to note here quite passively that it's an oligarchy. It's a cartel membership in which OPEC controls the oil prices. So the free market principle doesn't apply here anyway. So don't think about rebutting on that question. All right, I have mainly three questions to ask you as the whip speaker. Number one, does the free market work? Number two, who protects the environment? Mind you, they dropped this completely. Number three, how prepared are we for the future? And then I'm going to go into a little modest policy comparison, juxtaposition. Number one, does the free market work? The answer is no. Government intervention can work when it's allocated to the right resources. They brought us the example of Sweden. Actually, the same thing happened in Finland, and although it may externally look like I'm augmenting their case, I'm not. Because the government tried to artificially control both supply and demand of the Swedish oil industry, coal industry, and pine wood industry, the timber wood industry. Their industry completely fell, and the supply and demand chain was not properly expressed or represented. That is a problem with the government intervention. But the government intervention we're trying to do here is very, very passive and very modest. What we're only going to do here is take taxes from companies that have already caused harm to our society, both environmentally and into our energy industry by monopolizing it, and use it to transition into a better society in which these companies also reap their benefits as they are not reaping enough or they're not prepared enough for here. And we're making sure that the citizens do not go under some kind of so-called free market Adam Smith capitalist oil shock once again. In fact, even if we do have to make an oil shock, what proposition is saying that even if, I repeat, even if that oil shock does happen, which we highly doubt, it's going to be a lot better than that big oil shock we're going to have when we're not prepared during that 30 years after oil has been depleted. And they still haven't brought a response to that. I'm going to explain why free market principle does not work here. As I explained to you, and as our second speaker perfectly told you, energy industry is one of two things: monopoly and oligopoly. And to make this to make this a little clear, oligopoly is the control of the entire industry by a few individuals or a few companies. And in this case, what's the best example? OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. Now, although this is a foreign example, this is important because they're practically the sole providers, or if not the main providers of oil to most of the countries around the world. Statistics say around 89 to 95% of countries are mostly provided by OPEC. And since they are an oligarchy, no matter how free market you want to be, unless you're the United States of America that already has a big oil supply, it's going to affect your economy drastically. Now, I already proved to you that there are external forces outside the free market, which is, by theory, great. Adam Smith was kind of right. But there are forces outside the free market that harm it. And when these forces do exist, it's the government's duty to make sure that they do not come in and provide negative externalities. And that is what our policy is trying to cover today. If the free market is so effective, please explain on the opposition what could be the explanation behind the Great Depression. The Great Depression was solved because of government intervention. That's what Keynesianomics is all about. The reason Keynesianomics works is that there was a proper decision to a detrimental situation, and the government was just more than helpful. In this situation, of course, government intervention did work. Our second question, who protects the environment better? Although we've kept this argument quite steady, they've dropped it almost entirely. But the debate boils down to two things. Is it a citizen that should enforce it, or is it the government? First of all, Yosemite, the symbol of natural protection and environmentalism, has been constructed because the government enforced it to be. It's not that the citizens voted in America in the 19th century that they would like Yosemite National Park to become a park area, national park area. It's the government's intervention that created such environmentalist thoughts. Now, if they were correct, we've been doing this environmentalist movement for ever since J.D. Rockefeller got into the industry and the Industrial Revolution started getting into a kick-up. Now, Greenpeace and Sea Shepherd, they raid ships, do illegal stuff around the world to purpose their environmentalist actions. And how much change do we have in the whaling industry? Greenpeace also does environmentalists to go green. how green have we gotten ever since 2009 when they first proposed it? In fact, as we said, the subway system has proved more greener than Greenpeace, and the citizens have done a worse job of proposing this as the government. Although their intentions should be acknowledged as very, very gratuitous, the government is the sole actor that can provide these expenses to prove that ensure that these policies are taken into action. Now, the third question: how prepared are we? Before I do that, yes.
You're using examples that are not related to today's motion. We cannot tax OPEC as long as
No, I'm
cannot
not talking
help
about taxing
Greenpeace.
OPEC. I'm taxing about the secondary receivers of the oil from OPEC, which is GS and SK. If we do protect the free market, we'll be taxing these guys anyway. And that's why OPEC is an important player in this debate. On to the third question. I can explain to you in 2 words, very simple words, about how unprepared we are and why we're unprepared. No money. Okay? We have no capital in the industry, and they've already proven to you quite contradictorily that we have 30 years down the road and we're still in R&D development. By this stage, according to the International Energy Agency, which they like so much, according to them, we're vastly underprepared. I'm quoting the head here. We're vastly underprepared for the imminent energy crisis because we do not have renewable resources to fill up the gap of potentially expiring fossil fuels. That should be some sort of tingle to you. Why? Because I'm going to give you a rather friendly example. Hyundai produces over 20 types of renewable energy cars. How many can you name? Other than like Genesis Hybrid? None. The energy industry, without government help, the renewable energy industry at least, has been a complete failure because the government has not had direct intervention. Probably the only renewable energy or energy efficient car you can name is the Toyota Prius. And what happened with that? The government of the United States of America and Japan both said that the Prius should have lower prices so as to induce people to buy the Prius and use more renewable energy. And that's a possible explanation to why the Prius is possibly the only known car that produces good fuel efficiency while using renewable energy at the same time. I'm also asking you, it's great if companies are cooperative, and they said that companies will on their own accord develop renewable energy. That's great. It will only speed up the process. But the thing is, if they do it on their own without government intervention or government support in this case, they're not going to do it in time. As they said, I keep on saying this, I'm sorry, but we have 30 years down the road and we're still in R&D. At this time, we should get ready to integrate this into our civilian population. But how many hybrids do you see today? I mean, transportation industry, like Hanjin and heavy industries that transport things around the world, 0%, a big donut, is what represents the number of renewable energy ships that operate around the entire globe. Every single one is run on fossil fuels, and mind you, these are the largest spenders of fossil fuels in the entire industry. Now, as a last resort, I'm going to tell you and juxtapose the 2 policies. Number 1, our policy was that the free market is a good principle, but when push comes to shove, practicality should be taken into consideration, and in this case, the free market really does not work. Also, we said that the transition should be gradual. I don't know how many times we redundantly said this, gradual. They said that the $50 price tag will be put automatically on each oil barrel as soon as this so-called energy shock comes about. But as they have sort of conceded partially, we're saying that this process should occur very gradually. And as all historical examples have proven so far, even in the 90s OPEC crisis, oil shock crisis, whatever gradual improvement has been taken has been a good one. And it has never produced as many negative externalities as have been the instantaneous ones, or by second thought, the things that have been promoted by the free market. Their policy was kind of like, we should promote the free market without taking into consideration the circumstances, and that the transition will occur naturally. It will occur naturally. We do concede that. But it will not occur without cost if the government does not intervene here. We already told you that no, it will not work because the transition is too slow. And we already gave you too many reasons in our third question as to why this transition will be slow. Ladies and gentlemen, could I have my time, please? I don't have a stopwatch. All right, to sum up, ladies and gentlemen, the government side has shown you so far that we should have an energy-efficient policy that provides both the future plan and the most imminent plan. We need to take care of the energy crisis and make sure that nobody is harmed from it, both the corporations and the individual investors, whereas they've been trusting the free market, and we already disproved to you. We debunked the myth of the free market and told you why individual investors will not have as big a part as they will in any other situation. Because here, ladies and gentlemen, the government should be the actor in both environment, in both capitalism, and in preparing ourselves for the future, in which renewable energy will definitely be the main actor and supplier of our daily expenses. Thank you.
한성팀 퍼스트 토너먼트 팀의 3번째 토론자 이장규 학생의 발언 들어보셨습니다. 교수님 어떻게 보셨나요?
원래 3번째 연사가 앞에 그 두 연사의 글을 마무리하면서도
네,
동시에 우리 팀이 잘했다는 걸 강조를 해야 되거든요.
네.
굉장히 효과적으로 정부 미니멈으로 개입할 거고 동시에 지금 이야기하는 그 시장 원칙이라는 게 실패한
네.
경우도 있다라고 효과적으로 반박을 했습니다.
예. 자, 이제 반대측 무현면 팀의 발언을 들어보도록 하겠습니다.
Okay. May I begin? Okay. Mr. Madam Speaker, this debate is very straightforward. We all want to transit and shift from a fossil fuel energy-based economy to a more clean energy technology-based economy. But the problem is how? Because we both know that we have to do that within 30 years. And we both know we've been trying so by both ways, by government subsidies and also by private markets. That has been happening so far. So now is the time to analyze what has happened and what is our goal and what is the right way to achieve it based on the analysis of what has happened so far. So that's really the debate. Basically, whether or not taxation of these companies and the subsidies, and the ensuing subsidies for the clean energy-based companies has resulted in success, and whether or not the other alternative we've told you about having a private market economy based on capitalistic investment by the energy companies themselves will be more effective. In fact, we have proven to you that their case and their model has failed from the previous years, and we've told you how from the analysis of the past years, our policy has been proven successful, and that's the way to go. No, thank you, sir. So let's go into the two major clashes. First, basically, whether or not taxation of these fossil fuel-based companies will be beneficial to meet our goal, sustainable development. And second, about whether or not their second part of policy, subsidies, government subsidies for energy, clean energy companies will also contribute to sustainable development. So let's talk about the first part, about whether or not taxing these fossil fuel companies will be actually beneficial to meeting our common agreed consensus that we need to transit and shift gradually and with sustainable economy to an environmental friendly economy. So first of all, they started by talking about fossil fuel energy is already being subsidized despite their external cost and harm. And so it is actually fair for them to take the responsibility and be taxed. Well, first of all, again, it's not about whether it's fair or not. It's about necessity. And in fact, there are very facts that we are, despite the very externalities and harms on the environment, still giving billions and trillions of dollars actually around the world for these companies, prove the very necessity we have for fossil fuel. We really hate fossil fuel, and frankly, I would want to stop using fossil fuel for the sake of the environment that I love so much. But in the status quo, as we can see from the subsidies of trillions of dollars, the governments and the economy as a whole around the world all need this fossil fuel. And that is why, despite the external costs, we are still unfairly subsidizing these fossil fuel because we need them. And that is why we say that fundamentally, in order to have sustainable development, not only for the environment, but also for the economy as well, you still need to consider what might happen before we have clean energy. Because in those times, we still need fossil fuel. And that is why we shouldn't be accelerating the death of that industry. No, thank you, sirs. Now, in response to this, they talked about how we will still maintain a sustainable development by increasing the price of fossil fuel and thereby decreasing consumption. Well, we have two major rebuttals to this. Well, first of all, what the policy is basically saying is that they're going to create an artificial oil shock so that people will stop using oil, just like it happened in the 1980s or in the 21st century oil shock. But you see, no, thank you, sir. The major problem is that is still not sustainable. It is very contradictory from them to say that they want a sustainable and gradual change, but in the end, solve this problem by a mechanism through which we change consumer behavior by a shock, a very harmful shock, enough to change people's behavior despite the necessity of oil. So thank you, sir, again. So in the end, what they needed to prove was that there will be a viable solution right now, so that even though we increase the price of oil, we will have a viable solution and not a stagflation. But in fact, we've heard from the very last speaker that right now the only car that can use this renewable energy is Toyota Prius. Yes, I agree. We have never heard about it. Why? Because they're not effective. We've told you from the very first speaker that we still have no viable solution, that it is still the R&D technology stage. And that is why we have to admit, ladies and gentlemen, that yes, we have failed. We are not ready yet to ban and just go away from fossil fuel. Yes, sir, in the middle.
doesn't that demonstrate the necessity in order to subsidize because we have no money to invest in the renewable energy right now?
That is another assumption that came from the government side, which I will address. In fact, that subsidies will not be actually benefiting this investment, but rather harming them. In fact, let me address that point right now. In fact, we have seen that subsidies at the cost of the economy doesn't work. Why? Because stagflation by nature is a recession, just that it is a worse one than other normal recessions. And what does that mean? That means the government spending is decreased more and more, and that's why we see there has been bankruptcies of Solyndra and companies that have received $500 million from the government. And we see also that in terms of countries like Greece and Spain and Italy that have stopped their subsidies for these companies, not only because there's no breakthroughs through subsidies from government, but also by the fact that their very mechanism by which this policy works undermines the very sustainability of this policy, basically by draining out the economy and also the government funding due to stagflation, which basically means recession. No, thank you, sir. And that is why we say, in the end, if you really want sustainable change and gradual change, no, thank you, sir, what you really need is not taxation and killing of that industry that is so vital to your industry and economy. Now, of course, your only rebuttal to this was that actually it may not be that bad because you're having a gradual change. Well, we have two major points. First of all, then there's a case shift because the very mechanism by which they have a shock and therefore change consumer behavior is that it is a shock, a severe shock enough to change people's behavior in the first place. So if it is very gradual and easy, then in those terms, there will no change in consumer behavior in the first place because we need that fossil fuel so much. In fact, no, thank you, sir. In order for their policy to take place and change consumer behavior, their mechanism must work only under the circumstance that in the end they will have a stagflation and an artificial oil shock because that's the mechanism that they themselves have described as why their policy will change consumer behavior. So now let's go into the second major clash, which was a bigger clash about subsidies of government. Now, we both agreed in the end, and they conceded finally that fine, let's say the private market can work and it has succeeded. But maybe a boost by government subsidy will actually help them much. But that itself is contradictory, no thank you, sir, because what we say is government subsidy, whenever they try to allocate the resources by themselves and not leave it to private market energy companies themselves to decide and venture on, what happens is that first of all, governments themselves are cannot take risky ventures that may be going for breakthroughs because they're spending taxpayers' money. So unlike Axon and GS and Caltex, no thank you, sirs, what happens is that they cannot actually use $500 million just for one risky move that might actually bring breakthroughs. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, the government should not take money and resources from these energy companies and just decide on their own what is the best and efficient way to increase breakthroughs and increase renewable energy. But second of all, we also told you how the very idea of having subsidies for these markets basically means and implies that they will have some money and through taxation. In other words, in order for government to increase spending by subsidies, that means they have to take money away from the investment market, from the energy companies in particular, in this under their model. But the fact of the matter is, we've told you how private market, without government intervention and without the government taxing them, taking money away from them, is actually more beneficial and has actually proven more successful. We've compared the example of government subsidy-driven markets and private markets. We've given you examples about how Solyndra, a company that has received $500 million from the United States, has already gone bankrupt. Not only unsuccessful in producing a breakthrough, but bankrupt, ladies and gentlemen. But on the contrary, we've told you about how Californian government has allowed a free market and private market to flourish, and how their market is still flourishing and having a progress in R&D. Now, of course, their only rebuttal against this was about how, well, it's not a free market because you see you have oligarchy or monopolies, and their example was about how there are public utilities and how there are cartels regarding petroleum producers. Well, they're not the investors that we've mentioned anyways, right? We're talking about not those people, but the energy producers themselves, who actually have more incentives than any other company or any other government, since within 20 years, if they don't have any breakthrough within their own technology, they're going to die out. And that is why, ladies and gentlemen, in the end, these companies are the ones that can choose the best. And even though they say we can just take money and give them back to them, still, it's the government, under their model, it's the government choosing which company to receive more subsidies. And that is why that itself, allocation of resources based on government procedure and standards, that stuff is so harmful. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
네, 반대측 무현면 팀의 세 번째 토론자 이종훈 학생의 발언 들어보셨습니다. 내용을 좀 정리해 주실까요, 교수님?
예, 지금 세 번째 연사는 정부 쪽에서 하려고 하는 게 과세가 과연 효과적일까?
네.
그리고 정부 지원이라는 게 또 효과적으로 이루어질 것인가 하는 거에 초점을 맞추어서
네.
시장 원리에 맡겨두는 게 훨씬 유리할 것이다라는 입장으로 계속 대응을 하고
Ladies and
있네요.
gentlemen, don't be fooled
이제
by the
반대측 마무리
fancy
토론
language on the
들어보도록
government
하겠습니다.
side. Their argument comes down to 3 words. It is urgent. And that's the only side that the government side is saying today. The third speaker literally made a 7-minute speech explaining why it's urgent and it needs to happen now, ladies and gentlemen. Just because you have an urgency doesn't mean you have to do right now, ladies and gentlemen. Just because you're hungry doesn't justify you eating garbage, ladies and gentlemen. And exactly what we think of a government side's model today, ladies and gentlemen. Now, we've proven you through our rebuttals, especially now, why this policy does not work, why this policy harms the economy, why this policy harms the environment. We've had little to no response from the government side because they're so hacked on the urgency, ladies and gentlemen. But before I move on to my actual critical moments, let's first lay out what both sides understand. Firstly, we understand that the environment is in peril. Also, we understand that investment is needed. The conflict here is how do we get this, ladies and gentlemen? And we proved to you exactly how it does not happen on the government side's model. But again, they were so hacked on the urgency that they did not substantiate on their own points. So let's review their attacks on our point, that the free market has failed, ladies and gentlemen. But the fundamental contradiction on the government side was apparent, ladies and gentlemen. The second speaker came up to the podium and gave an example in which 12% increase happened under private market, ladies and gentlemen. But he said that subsidies would actually help this market, saying that private market has worked up to a certain point. Then the third speaker came up with an emotional speech by saying the free market has failed, that he actually stated that because the Great Depression happened because of failed market, that the free market has failed, ladies and gentlemen. With the same logic, I could say that smartphones happen on the free market and then free market is good, ladies and gentlemen. You can't make rational and hasty generalization upon that matter. Just because the Great Depression happened because of free market doesn't justify that every single action under the free market is wrong. They're factually wrong on that matter, ladies and gentlemen. As such, we proved to you factually instead that there are 2 reasons why the free market will work. Firstly, we proved that it's a dying industry, that companies, to survive, need to do this. Secondly, it's a blue ocean. As such, they are encouraged to do this among themselves. Wouldn't you, as CEOs, want to invest in a market that is promising and will profit you money, ladies and gentlemen? And they have no response from the government side. Moving on to their own case, does their model work? Does investing in their clean energy market work? Well, first, can it happen, ladies and gentlemen? There's controversy about price. Now, I gave you the destructive example of saying that you need $50 at least increase, ladies and gentlemen. What's their response? Well, I guess it's okay. It's kind of slow, ladies and gentlemen. There's 2 fundamental problems because you can really go either side. Firstly, you have a too small policy or a too slow policy because in economic terms, being too slow is the equivalent between too little, ladies and gentlemen. It has little to no effect on the market. Or secondly, you have too strong or too fast, which detrimentally harms the economy, and the oil shock, ladies and gentlemen. And they actually conceded to the point that an oil shock might happen, ladies and gentlemen. The oil shock damaged the economy for over a decade, ladies and gentlemen. We do not want to have a model in which the economy is detrimentally harmed, especially when you have the free market, which is currently working as the opposition side proved today, ladies and gentlemen. So let's move on to and does it work, ladies and gentlemen? Again, the only substantiation after the first speaker was saying that the breakthrough point is so close, that it's only 30 years now. The private sector is not working, ladies and gentlemen. Well, 2 fundamental problems, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, the government side never proved that without governmental subsidies, this will fail. The second speaker actually said we already have a 12% increase. Let's continue that and actually works. We've given you new logic why it does work because of dying industry and the blue ocean. While the government side said, well, it's urgent and government money is needed now. And as the government third speaker said, it's a donut 0, ladies and gentlemen. Regardless it's a donut 0 or a donut 100, ladies and gentlemen, we have to understand the right policies on the opposition side, and the government side never substantiate on their own policy, ladies and gentlemen. As such, we understand the subsidies have failed when it comes to the economic, the environmental perspective, and when we consider the free market, we side on the opposition side. And for these reasons, we are proud to oppose.
네, 반대팀 첫 번째 토론자였던 용인외고 조현서 학생의 마무리 연설 들어보셨습니다. 교수님 어떻게 보셨습니까?
예, 이제 마지막 자기 입장 정리를 하면서
네.
결국 지금 추구하고 있는 그 산업을 또 뭐 더 힘들게 할 거 있냐. 또 이미 지금 신기술 개발하고 있다는 것을 강조하면서
예.
찬성 쪽에서 가격을 조정하면 오히려 오일 쇼크 같은 그런 더 큰 경제적인 무리를 줄 거다 하는 걸로 자신들의 입장을 다시 한번 보강을 했네요.
네,
If you are
찬성팀의 마무리
adults
토론
and during your
들어보겠습니다.
public education, you have learned anything about renewable energy and that it's coming up, and if you see the current situation, you will know that something's wrong that's going on because no change is happening in today's society. And what the government is saying here is that if the opposition side is to call this failed, that's only when our society has been doing ever anything, ladies and gentlemen. We say that the reason why the technologies that we have learned that will come out soon is still in research and development is not because the government is doing it wrongly, it's because not enough money is there, ladies and gentlemen. Currently, as I've said from my introduction, more than 70% of the money that are invested to the energy industry is going into fossil fuel, not renewable energy. So if the government is trying something, that we could have actually admitted to the opposition that it's failing. But then are we ever investing enough money to it, ladies and gentlemen? The reason why we are seeing so many failures in this industry, and the reason why we're still actually experiencing a continuous increase in the consumption of fossil fuel is because we are not taking this policy, ladies and gentlemen. It's because we are not taking enough measures to decrease the size of the fossil fuel industry while actually increasing and subsidizing the clean energy industry, ladies and gentlemen. See, the fundamental problem here of the opposition side was that they did not have a case. See, what they were doing throughout the debate was that they did not have a value that they're going to stand. All they were doing is that they were criticizing small points of our policy, ladies and gentlemen, while we were trying to give you a direct value, a principle in which we can stand, about the environmental responsibilities of the government, about the government's responsibility to preserve the actual society and to be prepared for further changes. Now, those values were never touched in this debate, ladies and gentlemen. Now, they basically said that the only thing that they actually criticized about the actual mechanism was that the government is not the right actor here because they don't know anything about the industry. Now, first of all, any support for this was not given, ladies and gentlemen. Simple assumption. And we say that it's an assumption because in the government, there are actually experts within the industry who can make decisions. We made that clear. And second of all, they criticized that there will be an environment where the companies will become competing for the governmental subsidies, and that's a bad environment. Why is that ever a bad environment, ladies and gentlemen? When we're actually making these people to go for competition, aren't we actually looking for development? Aren't we actually making these companies to develop more and further, ladies and gentlemen? Now, they also talk about how the government should not be using the tax money to venture. See, two things. We have established that it's the government who can ever take the venture, ladies and gentlemen. Who else is ever going to do this? What kind of private industry is ever going to indulge in this issue and try to solve the problem when it's a venture? And not to mention that our third speaker perfectly said about this, it's not the taxpayers' money. It's the tax of the company. It's not our money, ladies and gentlemen. We made that clear throughout the debate. So what the proposition side was doing here was that we are giving an actual model that can actually prepare for the society. We were talking about how the energy threat is imminent and how we will have to increase the price in order to change consumer behavior. About this point, there was a big conflict because all they were saying was that we're going to have a $50 increase in price, and that's a serious thing. Ladies and gentlemen, gradual. Ladies and gentlemen, they talked about free market. What we were saying throughout the debate was that their free market, their so-called free market that they're so concerned about, adapts to gradual changes, ladies and gentlemen. It's not as if one day you wake up and the actual cost is much more increased by $50, ladies and gentlemen. You're going to have a dollar-to-dollar increase, and our society is going to adapt to that, ladies and gentlemen. We say that there were cases, yes, of governmental intervention that failed, but that's only because the government tried to manipulate the supply and demand here. But our policy is not talking about that. Remember, what was our policy, ladies and gentlemen? It's the government taking the money, simply taking the tax from the industries and transferring that money. We are not ever involved in the artificial supply and demand control here. That is exactly the reason why all the arguments do not stand, because we have properly pointed those arguments out, ladies and gentlemen. Now today, our case basically stands till the end, because while the opposition's rebuttals, not the case towards our stance and towards our policy, were all perfectly rebutted, our values about the governmental responsibilities were never touched, not to mention about the company benefits. They did not say anything about how these companies will be prepared in the future, ladies and gentlemen. The only thing they were concerned was about their own selfish needs, about if their price is going to increase or not. But we say that yes, it is going to increase, but not by $50, maybe % every day, and that is going to result in a better environment in the future. And if you think that this is true, please vote for the proposition side. Thank you.
네, 찬성팀에서도 역시 첫 번째 토론자로 나섰던 청심국제고등학교 김지훈 학생이 마무리 발표를 했습니다. 정리를 좀 해볼까요, 교수님?
예, 지금 찬성팀에서는 결국은 과세를 한다는 건데
네.
왜 과세를 해야 되냐, 그에 대한 정당성을 좀 부여를 하기 위해서 노력을 했던 건데요.
네.
신기술 R&D 저쪽에서 뭐 반대팀에서 R&D 그 자유시장 원칙에 의해서 투자한다라고 하지만 그게 엄청난 규모이기 때문에
네.
정부가 개입해야 한다는 걸 이제 강조를 했어요. 그러니까 찬성팀은 처음에 처음부터 이제 정부 책임이라는 거에서 시작을 했기 때문에
네.
정부 책임으로 이제 마감을 하는 예, 그런 종평 발언이었었습니다.
그렇군요. 저희 이제 뭐 찬성팀의 퍼스트 토너먼트 팀 그리고 반대 측의 모현면 팀 양쪽 다 마무리 토론까지 이제 모두 마쳤는데 뭐 미련 없이 다 얘기한 것 같아요.
예,
전체적으로 어떻게 보셨나요?
예, 사실 이 주제가 뭐 기업 활동에 대해서 과세를 하는 주제이기 때문에
네.
지금 우리 고등학생들 경우 우리가 지금 뭐 이런 주제까지 해야 하나 할지
좀
모르겠어요.
어려운데.
예. 근데 이제 이게 환경 문제가 뭐 이게 정부 차원에서만 다뤄지는 문제는 아니잖아요.
네네.
우리 일반 생활 요즘 이 기후가 막 이상하다
그렇죠.
하면서
예.
지구 온난화 이야기하고 하는 결국은 이제 이 환경 문제하고 연관이 다 되는 건데요.
네.
이 주제를 놓고도 지금 우리 그 결승에 올라온 두 팀이 열띠게 지금 토론을 했지만
네.
우리 가정에서 보고 있는 고등학생들도 보면서 이 환경 문제에 대해서 다시 한번 생각해 볼 수 있는 그런 아주 좋은 기회가 아닐까 생각을 합니다. 그러니까
예.
환경 문제라는 게 무조건 정부만 책임을 져야 되는 건지
네.
또 기업, 지금 여기서 기업이라고 했습니다만 이게 기업은 개인하고 또 이렇게
연관이
예,
있으니까요.
연관이 되어 있는
네.
거거든요. 그래서 그 아주 흥미있고 시사성이 높은 그런 주제라고 생각을 합니다.
예. 이런 주제들에 대해서 준비를 하려면 평소에 끊임없이 신문도 많이 보고 여러 방면에 좀 관심을 많이 가져야 될 것 같아요.
예, 맞습니다. 이 영어 토론이 주제가 저희가 선정하는 주제가 뭐 우리 지금 현 동시대에 전혀 떨어진 그런 주제라든지
네.
시사성이 없는 그런 게 아니라 지금 바로 이 시점 우리가 살고 있는 이곳에서 일어나고 있는 주제들을 다 다루기 때문에요.
네.
학생들이 뭐 물론 신문 뭐 관련 그 서적도 열심히 읽어야 되겠지만 그
네.
읽는 게 바로바로 현장에서 쓸 수 있는 지식이 되기 때문에
네.
학생들이 이 토론 공부를 하면서 참 많은 걸 배울 수 있다고 생각을 합니다.
그렇군요. 그리고 또 이 방송을 지켜보면서 다음에는 내가 저 자리에 가서 한번 토론을 해볼까 하는 학생들도 있을
네,
것 같은데요.
네.
또 좀 토론을 집중적으로 연습할 수 있는 효과적인 방법을 좀 조언을 주신다면 어떤 게 있을까요?
네, 지금 이제 고등학생 대회 같은 경우는 지금 이제 1학년 시작하는 학생들은 이런 대회를 보시면서 주제가 시사적인 거다는 걸 이제 아셨을 테니까
네.
가장 쉽게는 신문 읽는 거에서부터 시작을 해서 흥미가 있는 주제에 대해서 전문 서적을 찾아본다든지 하는 거에서 이제 준비가 시작이 되고요.
네.
이 준비는 빨리 하면 빨리 할수록 좋습니다. 뭐 중학생, 초등학생 때부터 내 주위의 어떤 주제에 대해서 관심을 가지고
네.
지식들을 차근차근 쌓아 나가면, 그리고 또 하나 중요한 거는 내가 습득한 거를 그냥 내가 내 머릿속에 있으니까
네네.
됐어가 아니라 뭐 가깝게는 가정에서 부모님께도 이야기해 본다든지 또 교실 수업에서 이게 이루어지면 가장 좋은데요.
네.
수업 시간에 꼭 뭐 교과 그 수업 내용하고 관련 없는 거 아닌가 하실지 모르겠습니다만 선생님들도 이런 시사적인
네.
주제를 가지고 학생들에게 좀 이야기해 볼 수 있는 기회를 많이 주시면 참 좋을 것 같습니다.
그렇군요. 그런데 이 결승전을 보다 보니까 물론 이제 개개인의 그런 능력도 중요하고 토론 능력도 중요하지만 팀워크가 상당히 중요한
네,
것 같아요.
맞습니다.
반대쪽에서 얘기하는 동안에 그 상대팀이 얘기하는 동안에 또 자기 팀에서 이렇게 전략을 짜고 서로 얘기를 주고받고 하는
예,
모습들도 보였는데
예.
팀워크가 상당히 중요하죠.
예, 이게 세 명이 한 팀이 돼서 하기 때문에 그 한 사람만 잘해서는 절대 이길 수 없는 이 게임이에요.
네.
그래서 누가 어느 포인트에서 어떻게 강조할 것인가 하는 거가 호흡이 맞아야 되거든요.
예, 예.
그래서 잘 들어야 되고요. 그러니까 상대방이 이야기하는 그 포인트도 잘 들어두었다가 거기에 적절하게 대응을 해야 되지만 내 팀에서도 한 팀 내에서도
네.
서로 잘 들어주고 도와주는 거, 이게 굉장히 중요한 과정입니다.
그렇군요.
예.
자, 이제 심판들의 점수 집계가 이루어지고 있는데 좀 손에 땀을 쥐게 하는
예,
그런
지금
순간이
이제,
아닌가 싶어요.
그 팀은 끝내고 지금
네.
아마 정말
심사
손에 땀을 쥐고 있을
기준은
겁니다.
어떻게 되나요?
심사 기준은 일단은 그 내용, 그러니까 논리가 가장 점수를 많이 차지하는
네.
부분이고요. 얼마나 논리적으로 자신들의 입장을 표현하였는가 하는
네.
거가 가장 점수 부분에서 많이 차지하고, 그 다음에 그 매너라는 것도 있습니다. 아까 제가 질문도 좀 받았으면 좋겠다라고 했었는데요.
예, 예.
이 토론의 또 한 가지 굉장히 중요한 원칙이 예의 바르게 해야 되는
네,
겁니다.
그렇죠.
그래서 상대방에 대한 어떤 그런 배려 이런 것도 다 채점에 들어가거든요.
네. 그렇군요. 지금 이제 집계가 한창 진행 중인 것 같은데요. 심사가 이제 거의 끝나가는 것 같은데 현장으로 다시 한번 연결해 보겠습니다. 한국외국어대학교 애경홀로 다시 한번 가보겠습니다. 네, 지금 발표를 앞두고 있는데요. 우승팀에게는 또 이 해외 연수의 특전이 주어지죠?
예, 맞습니다. 저희가 매년 대회 끝나고 난 다음에 토론 교육을 잘하는 학교를 저희가 찾아서
네.
우승팀과 함께 가서 연수를 받고 있습니다.
아, 그렇군요. 정말 그 우승팀에게는 특별한 그런 혜택이 주어지는데 과연 어느 팀이 우승을 할지 기대가 됩니다. 지금 찬성팀, 퍼스트 토너먼트 팀의 남학생 3명, 청신국제고등학교 남학생 3명이 발표를 했었고요. 그리고 반대팀에서는 모현면, 용인외국어고등학교 3학년 학생들로 이루어진 모현면의 여학생 1명이 유일하게 끼어있는
네.
팀이 최종 결승전에서 두 팀이 이렇게 마지막 마무리 발언까지 모두 하고 결과 발표를 기다리고 있습니다. 저 순간 얼마나 떨릴까요?
예, 지금 아마 지금
It was a great debate.
집계가 시간이 좀 걸리는 것 같습니다. 그렇죠?
네, 이제 발표를 하는 것 같은데요.
8-1 split decision. The grand champions of the 5th Hoops Ytn Hoops Youth English Debating Championship is congratulations to first tournament.
네, 제5회 고등학생 영어 토론대회 우승팀은 퍼스트 토너먼트 팀이 차지를 했습니다. 자, 이렇게 해서 이제 오늘 5회 우승팀 발표를 해드렸는데요. 그럼 이상으로 제5회 고등학생 영어 토론 대회를 모두 마치도록 하겠습니다. 해설은 한국어외국어대학교 통번역대학원 정철자 교수께서 수고해 주셨습니다. 오늘 말씀 고맙습니다.
네, 감사합니다.